I'm about to hook a really nice striped bass. I caught a bunch of really big fish that day, but you know what I didn't catch? Small fish. Believe it or not, that's a problem that many striped bass anglers, fisheries managers, and scientists are beginning to get increasingly concerned about. The lack of younger age classes of striped bass in the Atlantic fishery. It's a story I've heard before.
I had a summer job at a tackle shop. And just about that time, we started seeing concerning things with the striped bass stock.
Charles Wittig is an attorney, outdoor writer, hunter, angler, and New York BHA policy team member. He's also been a longtime fisheries advocate.
This was in the mid-1970s toward late 1970s. There were a lot of bass around, there were a lot of big fish around, but we weren't seeing any small fish. The school stripers, the stuff under 10 pounds or so, was disappearing. And I was at the shop one day, and somebody walked into the shop, and he had a box under his arm full of jars. And it turned out it was Bob Pond, who was the creator of the Atom plug that's so popular on the striper coast. And he started talking to me about his concerns about spawning failures down in Maryland that produces at least 3/4 of the coastal striped bass. And we talked, and what he was telling me with the poor spawns corresponded to what we were seeing with the lack of small fish. It turned out that Pond was right. The striped bass stock collapsed. I got involved in advocacy out of self-defense. I'm a fisherman, I like to fish, and fishing's a lot more enjoyable when there's fish in the water.
Welcome to the Conservation Cooperative, a production of the New England and New York chapters of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, where we dig a little deeper into the issues that are facing our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. My name is Chris, and in this episode, we are talking striped bass, the most sought-after fish on the eastern seaboard. Often described as everyman's fish, it's pursued by an extraordinarily wide range of anglers, from the once-in-a-summer to the never-miss-a-day crowd. Those anglers could be shorebound, or they could be on $1 million center console. A lot of people fish for stripers. NOAA estimates over 20 million trips a season. And as such, the fishery has a significant cultural and economic impact up and down the coast. Once hailed as a conservation success story, now the future of the stock is in question. Since 2019, stock assessments have indicated that the resource is in an overfished state. The Striped Bass Board of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, or ASMFC, is charged with recovering the fishery within 10 years. With the 2029 deadline on the horizon and poor recruitment, or in other words, not many baby striped bass being born, the clock is ticking, and managers are running out of options to turn things around with the time that remains. It's been a key issue for BHA here in the Northeast since 2019.
We have engaged in two ways.
That's Mike Woods, New England BHA chapter chair.
The first way that we got engaged was at the policymaking level, and primarily that exists within the jurisdiction of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And so when they have public comment periods on their management plans, whether they're updating major components or minor components, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has been a constant voice in those management plan decisions, advocating for options and outcomes that will protect the abundance of striped bass. The second way that Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has been involved in striped bass management is on the research side. And one of the things that, as we engaged in policy, that we realized was that some of the predictive modeling that's used to predict major causes of mortality, particularly recreational release mortality, was lacking. The studies were outdated and they weren't comprehensive, and they may not have even really represented the variety of conditions that striped bass experience across the range on an annual basis. And so several years ago, we decided to start investing money in studies that are going to do a better job of modeling these things and eventually are going to feed into the management decisions that are made on this fishery.
Arguably, the leader in striped bass research over the past several decades has been the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries, or DMF. Meet Ben Gehagen, a fisheries scientist and DMF's recreational fisheries program leader.
The Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries is a state public agency, so we manage public trust resources that are held by the people for the people. So whenever we're working with these resources, we're trying to do management that increases access for all communities and manages that resource sustainably for the future. We've been a leader in striped bass research and management for a long time. So specific to the research we've done a lot of migration research. We've done diet studies. We've done multiple post-release mortality studies as the scientific capabilities have changed over time. And we've done a bunch of migration work as well and habitat use.
The research BHA has been eager to support recently are the division's citizen science opportunities, which have the potential to generate far more data than DMF staff could ever collect on their own. Kim Fine, a colleague of Ben at DMF, runs the longest-standing citizen science initiative known as SADCAT.
So SADCAT is the sportfish angler data collection team. We collect information on various marine species, but one of which is the striped bass. As an angler, you collect pertinent biological catch data along with the length and a scale sample so we can use the scale to generate the age and do age at length data, which allows us to track cohorts and movements over time and to better manage the striped bass population by being able to follow certain cohorts through time. And what's really cool about the SADCAT program is that it started in 2002, so we have a long running time series to be able to track not only specific cohorts with the age data that we can collect off of the scales, but looking at the overall picture and tracking larger trends like is the population increasing, decreasing, plateauing.
For the past couple of years, I've been involved with SADCAT. At the start of every season, Kim sends participants small envelopes with a folded piece of paper inside. When I catch a striped bass that I'm going to collect data on, I bring it onto my boat and gently lay the fish down on a wet towel. I take the end of the towel and place it over the fish's eye and quickly take a length measurement. Next, I take a dull kitchen knife and scrape 5 to 8 scales from the side of the fish, just below the dorsal fin. I then slide those scales between the two folded pieces of paper within the envelope and release the fish. On the outside of the envelope, there are lines where I record the date, species, length, relative location, whether I'm fishing from shore or a boat, and whether the fish was kept or released. It took me a little while to figure out my own process, but now I can measure, take a sample, and release a fish within 10 or 15 seconds. I'll let Ben and Kim explain why this data is useful.
For management, what we really need is an idea of how many fish are around, typically female fish, what do we have available, what the population demography is, and mortality rates, and as fish are recruiting into a fishery and out, and then leaving the fishery to mortality, whether that's fishing or natural mortality. And so the age data that we collect specifically for striped bass is fantastic because it really allows us to keep tabs on how those cohorts are coming into our fishery and what we need to be thinking about coming into the future. And we collect commercial samples as well, but that's such a size selective range. So this is a fantastic way that volunteer anglers can contribute to the science and improve the science that otherwise we'd have a hard time and have to put a lot of effort towards collecting the thousands. How many thousand samples do you get a year? About 1,000 samples, Kim?
Across the board with all species, it's like roughly 1,800 to 2,000, but the majority of that is striped bass.
Yeah. So that's just a lot of effort. If we had to do that on ourselves to be able to sample striped bass, I don't think we could. So this is just an amazing way that state will contribute.
I believe during COVID, I got 2,400 samples.
Okay.
So like that was a banner year for SADCAT. I was really proud that year.
DMF has a second citizen science project that could have an enormous value down the road addressing release mortality. Currently, a rather dated study, not intended to inform management decisions, is being used to estimate the number of fish that die after being released by anglers. That study, conducted several decades ago, estimates that 9% of the fish released succumb to the stress of being caught. Given the number of trips taken and the estimated number of fish caught, that means roughly half of striped bass mortality is the result of catch and release fishing. Based on a new predictive model that came out of a study that DMF conducted looking at jay and circle hooks, Gehagen and colleagues believe that they can take angler data and build more accurate projections on fish release mortality based on the type of equipment, temperature of the water, and more.
So if you tell us important things like, where was that fish hooked? Was it in the mouth? Did it hit the gills? Was it deep in the mouth? Was it, lip? Was it a gut hook? What was the water temperature? How long did you fight it for? How long did it take you to release that fish? Things like that. We can predict with fairly high accuracy whether or not that fish died. So now we had an opportunity to ask not just what's the difference between circles and jay hooks, but we can redo that whole 9% estimate and actually have specific estimates for all the different types of gears that striped bass anglers use. You love to go out and use your 8, 9, 10 weights and you 3-inch to an 8-inch fly, depending on what's hanging out. And it could be the guy casting a 12-inch dock. It could be a guy soaking clams. It could be a lady trolling a rapala. Whatever's going on, we can get to that answer now.
So what forms of data are anglers collecting? Well, in addition to the details and the type of gear they're using, the fight time, the hook location, length of fish, presence of blood, and the swimming ability upon release can be recorded manually on a data sheet and then later submitted, or by using an app on a cell phone called Gut One. From there, data is compiled and analyzed by DMF. The cool part is there's a nearly real-time data portal where the public can view this data.
We have a data portal that everybody can see the data as it comes in. We update it multiple times a week. And that funding for that's supported by backcountry hunters and anglers. You can go to our website and find it. It's a really great resource. And we're seeing patterns. So that's wonderful that we can go and look and understand what factors about a lure might affect mortality. What factors about how we handle our fish might affect mortality.
From tracking cohorts of fish entering our local waters to better understanding how the tackle we choose impacts the well-being of the fish we release, anglers taking part in these programs have the opportunity to help provide the data that can help inform future management decisions. Remember though, it's not the scientists making the decisions. It's the members of the ASMFC's Striped Bass Board. And like any political process, things can get complicated.
When Amendment 3 to the management plan was passed in '85, the Striped Bass Board and all of the ASMFC management boards were composed primarily of professional fishery managers. There were governor's appointees, there were legislative appointees, but they each one voted as a caucus.
Charles Whittick again.
So where, for example, New York's or Connecticut's or Massachusetts' professional fisheries manager each had one vote on the management board, the legislative appointees collectively had a single vote, and the governor's appointees collectively had a single vote. And what that meant was the professional managers controlled the outcome. Around 2000, they decided to go to a caucus voting system. They changed the charter of the commission so that each state voted as a caucus, that the professional manager, the legislative appointee, and the governor's appointee would vote within the state, and that the majority vote within each state caucus then became the state vote at the board. So at that point, the two amateurs, the two appointees, could override the professional fishery manager. That had an unfortunate effect at ASMFC, because instead of science governing, suddenly there were a lot of economic concerns that overrode good science. There were what I'll call social concerns that overrode good science. And so the stock suffered.
So, with individual states having different interests and different interests existing within the state's caucus, things can get complicated quickly. And while there have been fair criticisms in the past decade that the striped bass board hasn't always taken decisive action, or any action, when stock assessments indicated bad things on the horizon, thanks to pressure from the recreational fishing community and organizations like ASGA and BHA, things seem to be changing.
We are going on 5 consecutive years of more or less failed spawns in the Maryland portion of the Chesapeake Bay, which is the largest contributor to the coastwide stock. So it doesn't matter how good fishing is right now, come 6 or 2027, that train is running out of track, and we're going to have nothing fill in and have pretty substantial gaps in the age and population structure of this fishery. So there are, I'd say, dozens of board members that understand that and are doing what they can now to try to keep fish in the water, keep population stable, to prepare for that downward trend or, again, just gaps in the population.
Will Poston is a policy associate for the American Saltwater Guides Association, who represents conservation-minded guides and small business owners. Since ASGA was founded in 2019, they have been on the front lines of striped bass management policy.
The Striped Bass Management Board has shown their ability to do hard things to protect this resource. Amendment 7, which was approved and implemented 2 years ago, that contained a lot of pretty strong conservation measures that will improve the management of striped bass. It made the trigger mechanisms to implement new management a little more reactive. It injected much stronger guardrails on the use of conservation equivalency, which had largely been abused by certain states to more or less allow their state anglers more access to kill more fish. So Amendment 7 was a huge win for striped bass conservation. And then just last spring, the Striped Bass Management Board saw the writing on the wall, saw that recreational harvest doubled year over year, and they took the pretty unprecedented action to take emergency action to greatly constrain the slot limit, which was previously 28 to 35 inches, and they shrunk it to 28 to 31 inches in an attempt to protect more of this strong 2015 year class. I give the Striped Bass Board some kudos. They have greatly improved.
Nicola Messerv is one of the newest members of the Striped Bass Board, representing Massachusetts as the proxy for the commissioner of the Division of Marine Fisheries.
The board is primarily responding to stock assessment information. The stock assessments are really the foundation for the direction that the management takes. Those are conducted on a coastwide basis, and all the states are then following the information of that stock assessment. So currently we are waiting for the 2024 stock assessment to be released this October, and that is going to provide the foundation for management in the next couple of years. It will indicate to us whether or not we are on track to rebuild the resource by the deadline of 2029. and whether additional management measures are needed to keep the fishing mortality at a level that can rebuild the spawning stock biomass.
There is a lot of anticipation surrounding the upcoming stock assessment. But what goes into a stock assessment? Well, a lot. Nicola explains.
So stock assessments for striped bass are generally conducted every 2 to 3 years, and they include a lot of information collected by the states as well as some collected by NOAA fisheries. There is commercial landings, discard estimates are developed from observer data and tagging data. There are recreational harvest estimates and catch estimates. And then there's also life history information that's collected from the catch and fishery independent surveys. So a lot of states conduct surveys that either sample for young of the year striped bass or older age classes. There's a federal trawl survey that collects information, and those indices of abundance also feed into the stock assessment. And the main products of the stock assessment are an estimate of the population size, as well as the fishing mortality rate that looks at the rate of removals and whether that is sustainable. So the stock assessment also sets reference points are estimated. So those are kind of the benchmarks that we're aiming for. There's typically, and in the case of striped bass, there's a target level, what we're aiming for, and then there's a threshold level that we definitely don't want to go below. And when we get below, say, the threshold spawning stock biomass, the stock is considered overfished, and that puts us into a rebuilding plan, and that's where we are currently for striped bass.
There is no doubt that striped bass are one of the most heavily researched fish in the Atlantic. Still, at the end of the day, all managers can attempt to control is the number of fish killed. To do this, they can push or pull a number of levers, like manipulating open seasons, restrictions on the type of equipment used, or limiting the number or size of fish that can be harvested. While these decisions are important, there are still a lot of factors that influence this fishery that just simply cannot be controlled. Here's Charles again.
Unfortunately, most of factors affecting recruitment are completely out of human control, at least in the short term. Climate change is real. We're having warmer winters, we're having warmer, drier springs, and that is causing poorer spawning conditions for striped bass. This year, where we had a little cooler winter, we had a little wetter winter, we had a little wetter spring, we had good water flows and good water temperatures, we're hoping for better recruitment and maybe even a strong year class in 2024. We'll know in about a month when the first Maryland surveys come in whether that's possibly going to happen or whether we're looking at another bad year. But outside of controlling climate change, which certainly is not a short-term solution, the only thing we can do is reduce mortality on larger bass and make sure there's enough bass entering the spawning stock biomass that we have a spawning reserve when conditions turn favorable again.
So, protect what we have and hope for favorable spawning conditions in the future. Mike Woods remains hopeful, but he believes that anglers can't be bystanders.
My hope is that we are going to be able to recover the fishery. They are going to hold themselves to that deadline, and they're going to take the measures necessary to recover the fishery. The other thing that I will add here is that we as an angling community are going to get, whether we're talking about striped bass or any of the other fisheries, we are going to get the fishery that we fight for, and we're going to get the fishery that we deserve. And so whether ASMFC undertakes this recovery or whether they don't, that outcome is largely going to be determined not only by the managers themselves, but also by the anglers who show up and fight for the resource that they enjoy and that they depend upon.
We hope you'll consider showing up with BHA in our efforts to ensure future abundance of Atlantic striped bass. If you regularly fish for stripers, please take part in the citizen science projects we discussed in the show. We'll have links in the show description for more information so you can sign up for these efforts. Also, take part in the policy process. Stay engaged and take action when we put out the call. You can find a bunch of resources and blog posts related to striped bass on the BHA website. You know what? I want to break from the main narrative here and share a really important piece of tape that I want everyone to hear. It's relevant to the big picture, and I suppose it connects to who we are as conservationists. Here's Ben Gahagan again.
We think it's super important, obviously, for the future of striped bass to reduce fishing mortality. That doesn't mean that if you are somebody who enjoys eating striped bass, if you're enjoying somebody whose neighbor enjoys eating striped bass, and that's the connection they have to the ocean and that fish, that you not harvest that striped bass that the quota says you can. Like, we're trying to do the best we can to manage the fish. Harvest is a component of it, but we have control of harvest at the moment. If we don't want to have to get rid of harvest because it's such an important part of our connection to our environment and these fish. So you should not, don't take more than you need. Don't take more that you're going to use, but don't feel bad about eating striped bass. It's still being sustainably managed at the moment, and we're going to sustainably manage it. And it's a natural resource that should be treasured and enjoyed.
Thank you so much for listening. You will find all of those relevant links in the show notes. Both the New York and New England chapters have a lot going on, so go check us out on social media or head over to the BHA website. If you're not already a member or you need to renew, go do that right away. Your membership matters as it helps us build capacity and make a difference on the ground, as does your direct involvement. So if you want to dig in something, let us know. Join us at an event. We will be back next month with another episode. Thanks again for joining us. Take care.